today's distinguished speaker, Professor Leif-Eric EASLEY from Ewha Women's University. Professor EASLEY earned his PhD in political science from Harvard University and has since established himself as a leading scholar of international relations. His research focuses on South Korea's foreign and security policy and competition between the US and China, also the evolving dynamics of Korean Peninsula. Beyond his academic publications, he frequently provides analysis for international media and policy forums, bridging scholarship and practice. As introduced earlier, this evening, Professor EASLEY will deliver a lecture entitled Seoul's Diplomatic Diversification and Sending Credible Signals. Without further ado, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Professor EASLEY.
Thank you so much to my AKS colleagues. I wasn't expecting such an introduction, so eloquent, so well articulated in English. I think I better deliver my remarks in Korean, but then I wouldn't be nearly as eloquent, so please forgive me for continuing in English. But it really is such an honor to deliver the Societas Koreana lecture to all of you, especially when there are so many distinguished guests in the audience. I'm told that space for tonight's event filled up at record speed. I don't see all the chairs full yet, so hopefully those who RSVP'd will all come, because usually it's a 3-week registration period, and I heard that registration had to close in 2 days because demand was high. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that this is not because of the lecture or the lecturer, but because we've moved to such a beautiful venue and are anticipating catching up with colleagues over a delicious dinner. And so I will not delay the dinner, but I will try to get through my lecture in good time for Q&A with all of you and to enjoy the networking time thereafter. I think it is a timely gathering to address our subject of Seoul's diplomatic diversification and sending credible signals. You might notice that there's a lot going on in the world, and South Korea is working to navigate that. And one of the takeaway points I hope that you lead with tonight is that South Korea is actually doing an impressive job in navigating these external challenges and forces. Perhaps a better job than it's often given credit, and even a better job than many South Koreans give their own diplomacy credit. So I will be elaborating on that tonight. As you can see, we've got a bit, I hope, to cover. Given the distinguished group here, I want to do a bottom line up front, provide the argument at the outset. So I'll do that for just a minute, and then talk about South Korea's strategic challenges, capacity building attractive to North Korea, regional contributions visible to the United States and China, and then wrap up with some conclusions about Seoul's regional role. And I should mention that this is a lecture based on a research project in progress that will culminate in a journal article. And my RAs that are so instrumental in supporting the project are here with us. So if you have any questions about the specifics, the data, some of the empirics that I don't have time to cover, you're welcome to ask them about it. Or give them your business card, and we'll be sure to send you the full paper once it is published. I've also added in the conclusion, because before you start dinner, you want to end on a high note, some memes that my RA and I worked hard to generate with ChatGPT. So I hope you look forward to those at the end of the talk. I ran them by my teenage daughter, and she didn't laugh at all. She said, "Daddy, at least your audience will see that you tried." So what you just gave me right now, that sort of polite laugh, I'm anticipating that at the end, okay? Just wanted to give you a heads up about that. So To start off with the argument up front, we have in South Korean diplomacy a regional strategy that the ROK is pursuing to expand diplomatic partners and economic opportunities. That in itself is not new. Indeed, the new Southern policy dates back to the Moon Jae-in administration. And this NSP and its successors under the Yoon administration and now under the Lee administration are middle power approaches involving multilateralism, coalition building, and niche diplomacy. What's interesting, and I think notable, and even praiseworthy, and shows that this strategy is worthy of further resources and development, is that Seoul's Southern strategy isn't just about pursuing diplomatic diversification and more economic opportunities in the region for demographic reasons and for reasons of securing market share abroad. It also is important as a demonstration project to observers in Pyongyang about what South Korea, South Korean industry, and South Korean society can do with its partners. And it also helps navigate US-China rivalry by showing meaningful public goods contributions to the observers in both Washington and Beijing. So that is the bottom line up front. Where does this come from? Well, it originates with South Korea's strategic challenges, of which I will focus on two. First, North Korea as a security threat. North Korea's nuclear missile development obviously is the headline story. It's something that's been going on for quite some time, and if you've been following speeches at the United Nations, you will hear North Korea claim that it's not giving up its treasured weapons. It is now part of the North Korean Constitution, part of North Korean strategy, and even part of North Korean law. North Korean military threats to the South Koreans persist despite efforts for reconciliation and economic cooperation. And many South Koreans also, including some leaders on human rights issues and former residents of North Korea in the audience today, are concerned about the human rights situation facing fellow Koreans in the northern half of the peninsula. There are also risks to regional stability. It used to be that many were worried that a North Korean leadership transition could result in a collapse of the regime and a vacuum that would cause instability in the region. But now, the primary concerns emanating from the north for regional security are arms races and, of course, the danger of unintended escalation on the peninsula and in the region. North Korea is also part of a very important identity issue on the peninsula. It's not just about military, it's not just about traditional security. Because of the wide economic, social, and political gaps between North and South, there is a serious issue of political legitimacy. And the problem is that the North Korean regime deals with this by demonizing South Korea for its own domestic political legitimacy. But we know that integration is essential for peace and perhaps unification one day, and capacity building, cooperation is needed. But in the current political environment, it's very difficult given North Korea's refusals to accept overtures from the South. And I'm sorry to say this so frankly, but there's also a variable of domestic political polarization in this country. Because in South Korea, swings in policy can occur with changes of administration, because not unlike my own country, the United States, and many other countries around the world today, there are issues of domestic political polarization. But Korea is a particularly important case to study that because having two Koreas on the peninsula sets up a range of identity issues that dovetail with the security questions we've already discussed. Then, there are the destabilizing actions by the DPRK. As you're aware, they've conducted 6 nuclear tests with a 7th presumed ready by intelligence agencies. Diverse missile tests over the years, not only of short and intermediate range, but even those of intercontinental ballistic missile range. And not only ballistic missiles, but cruise missiles. Missiles that are designed to evade missile defenses. Missiles that are designed to be launched with solid fuel on very short notice without being able to be picked up by satellite and other intelligence matters if they were being fueled with liquid fuel. A lot of ways of disguising these missiles, different platforms from which to launch them. And it's not just about a military buildup in the North. The North has also destroyed the liaison office where the South Koreans and North Koreans previously gathered to discuss inter-Korean relations and inter-Korean cooperation. They seized assets at the Kaesong Industrial Complex, which was closed after a number of North Korean provocations and was really the only place where Koreans worked together on industrial cooperation and manufacturing. Unfortunately, that has been hollowed out by North Korean asset seizures. And they've demolished buildings at the Kunbangtan tourist resort, which used to be a place not only for South Korean tourists to see beautiful nature in the north and interact with some North Koreans, but it was also an important venue for separated family reunions. And unfortunately, North Korea has signaled that they do not have interest in resuming that cooperation with South Korea, at least at this time. They've engaged in a lot of threatening rhetoric, doctrine that includes warfighting and even perhaps first use of tactical nuclear weapons. And of course, threatening exercises. North Korea does a great job of complaining about South Korea's exercises, but they go on about their military exercises which are threatening the South. There are, of course, the provocations in the West Sea. You don't have to go too far back in history to find the Cheonhan incident in 2010 and the shelling of Whitetail. But of course, there have been other skirmishes, incidents including the shooting and killing of a maritime fisheries official from South Korea, violations of the NLL, the Northern Limit Line that North Korea does not recognize. And of course, those who underestimate North Korea's technology and see it as a poor or isolated place do so at their peril, because North Korea is one of the most sophisticated cyber hacking and crypto theft powers in the world today. And they use the cyber hacking not only for intelligence gathering about South Korea and finding vulnerabilities. And I don't mean to put too fine of a point on it, but if you're a customer of KT or SK or Lotte Card, or had your government services disrupted by a fire at a data center recently, you can imagine that South Korea is incredibly reliant on digital solutions and on our cyber identities. And North Korea may be looking for ways of disrupting South Korea with those sorts of vulnerabilities. And their crypto theft is incredible in helping fund their nuclear and missile programs, as well as the gifts that the regime uses to keep the elite in Pyongyang happy. So destabilizing actions, and also difficult to deal directly with Pyongyang. Obviously, the sanctions regime that South Korea is good at abiding by limits Seoul's use of economic tools with the North. During the pandemic, the DPRK shut down its borders and used the opportunity of self-isolation to clamp down on the gray markets, the Jamadan, the cross-border activity, often by female entrepreneurs. That has been cracked down on by the regime. And the regime has passed 3 laws for punishing those that deviate from information control or consume foreign culture, and has really made tough efforts to address the penetration of outside culture and information into North Korea. Meanwhile, the DPRK refuses South Korean aid despite food shortages, poverty, and humanitarian disasters. And perhaps it does not need a great amount of aid assistance and economic cooperation with the ROK if China is acting as an economic benefactor. On top of all this, the role of Russia on the Korean Peninsula and the role of North Korea in the security of Europe has been increasing as a transactional relationship has deepened between Pyongyang and Moscow, with Russia increasing sanctions violating trade in exchange for North Korean military support in Russia's illegal invasion and war against Ukraine. Now, what's the second big strategic challenge for South Korea? Well, these guys are coming to the Korean Peninsula, hopefully, for APEC, but it's a lot for South Korea to navigate. US-China rivalry, where China is South Korea's largest trading partner, but China is locked in superpower rivalry with the United States, which is Seoul's military ally. Meanwhile, Beijing's foreign policy has become more assertive, some might argue more coercive. And under President Trump, the United States, with its tariff policy, investment demands, and export controls, pose a great number of dilemmas for South Korean firms and companies. American pressure, of course, is not new. It just might be different in intensity and focus. During the Biden administration, the United States pressured South Korea to support the US Indo-Pacific strategy and to help contribute global public goods to uphold a frame and international order under stress. In the Trump administration, we've seen that pressure shift and intensify to dealing with trade deficit and, of course, defense cost-sharing demands. So American pressure is obviously something that South Korea looks to navigate. And then there's the China challenge. We could go back very far in history. We have so many Korean history experts here, though, so I don't believe that I have to do that. I would like to go back, though, to 2016-17 when the United States and South Korea announced deployment of the Theater High Altitude Area Defense Missile Defense System and radar, which was responded to by Beijing with economic coercion toward South Korea. And a demand by Beijing that South Korea must adhere to and respect Chinese interests, including limits on US military drills and presence in Asia, no interference in core interests of the People's Republic of China, such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Tibet, and others, and cooperation with the Belt and Road Initiative, or more broadly speaking, China's trade and connectivity and investment agendas in the region, and Chinese defined stability, which many argue is something of a Tianxia revival with China at the center. And of course, we can ask, as we saw a very impressive military parade in Beijing, which I think, frankly, Kim Jong-un was probably a little bit jealous of, and even my president was probably a little bit jealous of. We saw at that parade and meetings connected to it, Xi Jinping at the center of Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. So we can ask whether Russia and North Korea are falling in line of this China order. So what to do? Well, I'm sure our diplomats and practitioners in the room have many different answers to this question, but a professor dusts off the literature and looks for hypotheses and theories to test, and there are many. But two that I'd like to highlight today, and you heard about them in the title of the talk, are diversification and sending credible signals. And I think diversification is very important for South Korea because it's about reducing dependence and vulnerabilities, safeguarding economy and stability. And credible signals are important to demonstrate commitment, intentions, reliability via costly financial and reputational investments. So not just investments that are of financial nature, but also a political commitment to cooperate regionally with diversified partners. And it's very important that there's domestic buy-in in order for your signals to be credible. Because without domestic buy-in, the policies may become victim to that political polarization I mentioned, and changes in policy with changes in administration. But Seoul's Southern strategy has domestic buy-in. And so we see actually a fair amount of consistency across administration. So, with those insights from the academic literature, let's talk about the demonstration projects to North Korea. And by the way, South Korean government officials I've interviewed for this project say, Professor EASLEY, you're overestimating our strategy. You're giving us too much credit. We didn't think this far ahead. This is not the intention. But despite that modesty, and despite some of these projects not being a direct relevance to North Korea, I think that there are second-order effects, and that's what I'd like to speak with you about. Diversification is not just a strategy for dealing with economic uncertainty and seeking out new markets and worrying about demographic decline at home and how you're going to find new partners if trade relations with China are changing very much and so on. But I argue that it's also a demonstration project, and I found this in my research. By September 2019, President Moon Jae-in visited all 10 ASEAN states, plus India, under the new Southern policy, to boost trade, investment, development, and diplomacy. ASEAN partners, meanwhile, and their platforms like the ASEAN Regional Forum, for example, are venues for promoting peace on the Korean Peninsula and even venues where North Koreans and South Koreans can meet. And it's no coincidence that the two full summits between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un were in Southeast Asia, in Singapore and Hanoi. The ASEAN way that defines the 10-member grouping's diplomatic approach is based on mutual respect, coexistence, cooperation among diverse states. Why does this matter for inter-Korean relations? Because it can be a signal to the DPRK that Seoul has experience, that Seoul is capable, that Seoul is willing to tolerate different political systems and to engage in economic cooperation with them. So South Korea's capability and willingness to build capacity in Asia is relevant for North Korea. Credible signals for inter-Korean cooperation come from South Korea's regional initiatives, from sustainable infrastructure, human resource development, digital connectivity, projects that are visible to North Korea through its presence in Southeast Asia. North Korea has active relations with 8 of the 10 ASEAN members and has a diplomatic presence and economic presence in the region that obviously keeps an eye on what South Korea is doing in the region as well. So there is a sort of second-order consequence or indirect effect of South Korea's cooperation in Southeast Asia that signals to the DPRK that the ROK is a trustworthy partner for development cooperation. And while not easy, while perhaps not something that happened overnight or even within the current administration's term, but certainly there are efforts to do that, it is possible that this can help persuade Pyongyang that inter-Korean exchanges can be mutually beneficial. So let me speak first a bit about the sustainable infrastructure, because Korea is really doing a lot in Southeast Asia and South Asia. Sustainable infrastructure is important for economic growth when it comes to building hospitals, very important for public health, medicine, and it's also important for environment and agricultural development. There are various Korean ASEAN investment funds and cooperation ongoing. And just to give a few examples, the largest bridge in Brunei and other projects show that Korean-built architecture and infrastructure can plug into that of Chinese firms, because this bridge basically had parts built by the South Korean firms and parts built by Chinese construction firms, and comes together rather nicely for the usefulness of the economy while also respecting the environment there in Brunei, connecting parts of the country that were previously difficult to navigate to each other. In the Mekong River Delta area, initiatives address climate change, disasters, promote green growth and fair access. And in the Philippines and elsewhere, there are important efforts to modernize rail, which is useful for boosting safety, which has been an issue at times in the region, and also improving air quality. And I have to mention that COICA is an implementing organization and funding organization for many important projects. For example, in Vietnam, for renewable energy that helps reduce energy intensity, and other projects that look to cut emissions in Southeast Asia. Human resources, also an important focus of Seoul's Southern strategy, because frankly speaking, South Korea is seen as an attractive partner. It doesn't have colonial baggage like some other important investors and trading partners. It is an economic success despite not having a tremendous amount of natural resources on its own. And so that success story can be inspiring. Maybe not a model, you can't really say that it's a template for other countries, but certainly Seoul's success piques the interest of countries that also want to boost their development and economies. People-to-people exchanges, including international students, early mid-career training programs, professional networks, and collaboration have grown under Seoul's new Southern policy and related initiatives. Korean companies advance human resources with on-the-job training, corporate social responsibility initiatives, including medical donations and capacity building in local jurisdictions. And they also provide models of openness and transparency. We saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic in the ways that South Korea responded, not only domestically, but also in their international relations with democracy, science, and harnessing big data and technology. Also, women's economic empowerment via entrepreneurship support programs, very important in the human resource cooperation of South Korea and partners in South and Southeast Asia. Digital connectivity is an area where South Korea has a comparative advantage. The RK Ministry of Science and ICT works with ASEAN to boost digital innovation, e-government, smart grids and cities, using the Internet of Things, and of course, everyone's favorite buzzword these days, artificial intelligence. Overseas official development assistance to Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Philippines, Vietnam, and others have supported digitization of services, more resilient supply chain logistics. And South Korea has also advanced ICT partnerships with Indonesia and Singapore on cybersecurity, fintech, and cross-border data protection. With India, there's been cooperation on 5G ICT technologies, and also the establishment and coordination of startup hubs and accelerators for joint innovation between India and South Korea. Now, what kind of public goods contributions, I mean global, regional public goods contributions is South Korea making that are visible to the United States and China? Well, first I'd like to discuss contributions on non-traditional security. I can't fail to mention this because this is, of course, an area where Ewha University has a good amount of expertise. But South Korea does this in a rather diplomatic way. Its maritime cooperation is framed around safety, sustainability, plastic debris. You might recall a lot of efforts in Busan diplomatically to try to address plastic debris in the region and the world. And framing maritime cooperation with other countries with these sort of, shall we say, non-traditional security banners avoids provoking China, which has, of course, hard security maritime disputes with countries in the region. Humanitarian assistance and disaster relief is an area where South Korea is active with the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, and an area where South Korea contributes on military medicine, counterterrorism, and minesweeping capabilities. There's also defense industry cooperation. South Korea is becoming a major exporter of defense equipment, but these are often under joint projects and equipment sales and the banner of capacity building rather than arms buildups. And South Korea is also engaging the PIF and Pacific Island countries on climate resilience in a way that is aligned with U.S. allies' partners in the blue Pacific. Obviously, Australia is a very important part of that and represented in the room here today. Multilateralism is another big part of the story. You have US ROK Japan statements that mention freedom of navigation and stability across the Taiwan Strait. But South Korea's approach is avoiding controversial freedom of navigation operations and exercises, and instead engaging in tri-level Coast Guard cooperation, exchanges on maritime domain awareness and incident response. There's going to be more capacity building going forward with ASEAN in cooperation. The United States, Japan, and South Korea under the Maritime Security Law Enforcement Framework. And South Korea is engaged with Quad functional groups that, of course, a very important aspect of the Quad is the membership and activities in India, but it doesn't explicitly join coalitions that are seen to perhaps be engaged in balancing China. So it's a bit of a threading the needle, they say. There's also a healthy focus on civil society. And here, South Korea avoids harsh criticism of other countries' human rights practices and policies, with a focus on civil society and benefits of the rule of law. Speaking very frankly, South Korea can engage with Southeast Asian and South Asian actors on this with credibility and speaking from experience, because South Korea has dealt with its own areas of challenges regarding the rule of law, and South Korean civil society has shown to be a formidable force, not only for democracy and good governance, but on upholding the national image and the national economy. While South Korea is careful about discussing the human rights of other countries, and an important exception, one that I studied, is the case of Myanmar, where South Korea called for a global arms embargo against the junta after the coup precipitated an escalation in that country's very heartbreaking and unfortunate civil war. South Korea endorses ASEAN centrality and institution building while navigating limited alignments in Southeast Asia. This is a concept of Southeast Asian diplomacy where you see, some say hedging, but I prefer limited alignments because Southeast Asian countries don't like to quote unquote choose sides between, say, the United States and China, and South Korea understands that well and navigates that very diplomatically. It also supports non-governmental organizations like the Asia Democracy Network, practitioner exchanges, and training on best practices, which is very important for civil society. As well known by the business leaders in the audience today, a big part of South Korea's contribution to regional public goods is the development of trade linkages. South Korea's FDI increases capacity in Southeast Asia, boosting trade, diversifying export markets and supply chains. Korean firms push technological solutions. I know from meeting with a number of South Korean business leaders that they don't want to waste a good crisis. That turn crisis into opportunity is something of a motto of South Korean business, and they've certainly pursued that in Southeast Asia when there are difficulties in terms of trade policy and the bending of supply chains because of tariffs and perhaps other countries that don't follow existing trade agreements. And so South Korea looks to turn crises into opportunities, particularly with its technological solutions. And it offers middle power leadership, leveraging the United Nations, the G20, FTAs, and notably APEC. Don't try to get a hotel in Gyeongju anytime soon because it's all booked. And we should be seeing some very interesting political and economic developments around Halloween time. This is all very important for international and regional trade architecture, rules, and norms. We see that South Korea is more than capable of cooperating both with the Japan-led and US-aligned Asia Development Bank, as well as the China-led Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And South Korea-ASEAN economic ministers meetings, one that just took place recently, are looking at improving FTA implementation and exploring additional cooperation in the region. So, I promised I would spend too much time on my slides, and hopefully have a good number of questions. So I'm prompting you to get your questions ready as I wrap up with conclusions, including major implications. Diversification helps increase stability and leverage for the ROK. Capacity building. Projects in ASEAN and with India demonstrate possible benefits for the DPRK, and regional public goods contributions complement both US and Chinese regional approaches. This is important because even while engagement with North Korea may be on hold and it may proceed in fits and starts, South Korea is developing a credible menu of ways to engage North Korea and demonstrated that it has the capability to do that. And as pressure continues in different forms and levels of intensity from Washington and Beijing, South Korea has many regional public goods contributions to point to say, we are helping carry the burden in this region. We are contributing regionally and to international security. So this is very important. I think it is not an exaggeration to say that middle powers like South Korea offer something of a third way in our very contested geopolitical environment of today. They provide options for developing states while looking to ease geopolitical rivalries. And notably, in a period where you just open up your newspaper, well, your digital newsfeed, and you see so many partisan, politically contested processes in our countries today, it is notable that Seoul's seventh strategy has domestic buy-in. It involves public and private partnerships. It involves a lot of South Korean companies and South Korean civil society organizations. It's not just a government initiative, and it is bipartisan. And that is very important for credible signaling. And in the full version of the paper, I explain why maybe the credibility of signaling is even more important than threading the needle with strategic ambiguity, which has sometimes been the policy of South Korea in the past. Future trajectory. Under the Lee Jae-myung administration, we're seeing the pragmatic pursuit of national interest under the banner of the people's government. I expect that you will see continued strategic engagement with South and Southeast Asia, further advancing initiatives to attract North Korea and navigate US-China rivalry. And I think South Korea will probably specialize even more in its areas of comparative advantage, including advanced manufacturing and artificial intelligence. Are you ready for me to lighten it up with some ChatGPT generated memes? Let's do it. So, South Korea's role is more than what you've heard. Of course, South Korea is the linchpin, the US ally in the region, ironclad, 가치가치다. But South Korea is so much more than that. Of course, it's an essential US ally, an essential to US strategy in the Pacific. But South Korea is much more than just a US ally. It's also much, much more than a shrimp between whales. And we actually asked my RA Smiling, because we did several iterations of this. I didn't want a shrimp, so I said, I want a dolphin. But I don't just want a dolphin between whales. I want a dolphin threading the needle. Dolphins are smart, right? And threading the needle is what we often say about trying to navigate US-China rivalry. But South Korea is more than that. It's more than just a reactive power trying to navigate the policies and actions of larger powers. So South Korea is more than those things, but there are some things that South Korea is not. Perhaps South Korea does not have enough capacity to act as a regional balancer or a global pivot. Some of these ideas were mentioned, regional balancer during the Moon administration, but that policy maybe didn't work out as intended. And the previous administration of President Yoon tried to sell South Korea as a pivot state. But perhaps South Korea's resources need to be more focused, particularly on initiatives in South and Southeast Asia. And then, of course, it's hard to serve as a mediator, not because South Korea doesn't have incredible diplomatic skill sets, but because you can't really mediate between the United States and North Korea when you're a US ally and have vested interest in the situation. This was something that President Moon found out when trying to mediate between President Trump and Chairman Kim. And it's also very difficult for South Korea to serve as a mediator between the United States and China. And it's also probably risky to pursue a policy of strategic ambivalence or ambiguity because both sides will demand South Korea to take a stand and declare its policy. And so this is not a recommended pursuit either. So you ready for my final slide? I'm gonna give you a preview. I tried to include K-pop demon hunters, but it came out a little scary. So I told ChatGPT to glam it up with a little Blackpink and BTS style. So here's what I got. South Korea, polite laugh. South Korea has a regional magnet. And putting AI-generated means aside, I think this is an important concept. Because South Korea has shown itself to be a norm entrepreneur, an innovator, a convener on global functional issues, from the environment to responsible uses of AI, to many economic standards that we'll be discussing at APEC. It's an attractive power in terms of its culture, its technology, its institutions. Many of the things that members of AKS and distinguished guests this evening are experts of, so I know I'm preaching to the choir on this. But I think it's so important that South Korea is a country that many other key players want to cooperate with. And that attractive power puts South Korea in a special middle power role to advance not only its interests, but also the prosperity and stability of the region at large. I thank you for your attention and look forward to our Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor EASLEY, for showing us how diversification is more than policy or strategy. It's a signal of resilience and credibility. The next time we think of Korea's place in the world, we may picture not a nation squeezed between larger powers, but a regional magnet whose culture, technology, and diplomacy inspire collaboration across Asia and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Professor EASLEY once more for the overarching contemporary insight. Now that the banquet is open, it's time to wine and dine while further sharing our thoughts. Once again, thank you very much for being with us. This has been Moon Kyung Kim. Have a wonderful evening.